Hi, you're in class with Dr. T. Today I'd like to talk about how racism and class inequality divides us. In particular, the problem with Ana Kasparian Coleman Hughes and why Sunny Hostin was triggered.
With some intense hostility, specifically from Sunny Hostin on The View, as he appeared on the show to promote his new book, The End of Race Politics: Arguments for a Colorblind America. At a time when the culture in America has essentially rejected colorblindness, instead embracing an almost obsessive focus on race and how we differ from one another, I honestly wasn't shocked that he was met with that kind of vitriol. We'll get back to that portion of the exchange in just a minute. But first, I do think it's actually important to understand Coleman as a person and the argument he's trying to make. In the interest of full disclosure, though, I do have to admit that I'm a fan of Coleman's, even though he and I have some disagreements. He's more supportive of Israel's war on Gaza, as an example. On some issues, he definitely leans to the right of me. But I actually find him to be thoughtful. He makes thought-provoking arguments in good faith. And I don't know about you, but I've been increasingly bored with shows that have default ideological talking points that hosts never deviate from. It's a mindless snooze fest. Sometimes Coleman's analysis on certain current events challenge my own, and I find that to be a good thing. We should all be willing to challenge and reevaluate our own beliefs without assuming the one challenging us is some grifter or right-wing pawn. I think it makes us smarter and mentally stronger. Now, with that out of the way, let's hear Coleman out on the direction he believes policy should go in America.
The default right now in a lot of areas of policy is to use, Black and Hispanic identity as a proxy for disadvantage. And my argument is that you actually get a better picture of who needs help by looking at socioeconomics and income. That picks out people in a more accurate way.
Not my question, but when you say that socioeconomics picks out people in a better way than race, when you do look at the socioeconomics, you see the huge disparity between white households and Black households. You see the huge disparity between white households and Hispanic households. So your argument, and I've read your book twice because I wanted to give it a chance, your argument that race has no place in that equation is really fundamentally flawed.
Look, I think Sunny Hostin's lack of logic here is what's fundamentally flawed. Just keeping it real. It's somewhat strange how triggered she is by the notion that we should focus economic policies on class rather than identity, like race. I assure you there are plenty of poor people of all races in America. However, she herself is a wealthy woman of color, so maybe class-based issues don't appeal to her the same way as they would for the working poor in America. And while it is true that Black and Latino Americans are more economically disadvantaged on average, it's also true that class-based policies would disproportionately benefit their lives without leaving poor white Americans behind. Why is that a bad thing? Don't we want to see all of our fellow Americans succeed, regardless of religion, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc.? Class-based economic policies have more buy-in among voters and tend to be harder to repeal because they're applied to everyone impacted by poverty. Coleman managed to maintain his composure, something that he's insanely skilled in, and responded, in my opinion, perfectly.
There's two separate questions. One is whether each racial group is socioeconomically the same. That I agree with you. They're not.
Yeah, they're not, and the stats show that.
Yeah, of course, I agree with that fully. The question is, how do you address that in the way that actually targets poverty the best?
Great.
And what Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, is he called it, we need a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. And he said, yes, we should address racial inequality. Yes, we should address the legacy of slavery. But the way to do that is on the basis of class. And that will disproportionately target blacks and Hispanics because they're disproportionately poor, but it will be doing so in a way that also helps the white poor, in a way that addresses poverty as the thing to be addressed.
He's right. I mean, I think he makes really good points there. But look, maybe Sunny Hostin has a counterpoint that we haven't even considered. So let's keep an open mind and give her a chance to respond.
You claim that color blindness was the goal of the civil rights movement, based upon Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, content of character versus the color of skin. He also said in 1968, it was about less than a week before he was assassinated, this country never stops to realize that they owe a people kept in slavery for 244 years. So rather than class, he did write about that earlier on, right before his death. He made the argument for racial equality and racial reparations. And so your argument for color blindness, I think, is something that the right has co-opted.
The quote that you just pointed out about doing something special for the Negro, that's from the book Why We Can't Wait that I just mentioned.
Yes.
A couple paragraphs later, he lays out exactly what that something special was.
Yes.
And it was the Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, a broad class-based policy.
But he also says you must include race.
No, he didn't. He says it's
Yes, he does.
Okay, well, everyone should go read the book Why We Can't Wait.
I gotta say, I mean, I didn't notice until this very moment, but the fact that she's rejecting class-based politics while wearing a Gucci button down and a Gucci belt is hilarious. But nonetheless, disagreements about MLK tend to, drive me crazy. But Coleman is correct to point out the class-based politics that the civil rights leader espoused. In fact, mainstream discussions about MLK tend to leave out his views on class politics.
A lot of mainstream media don't give you honest news. We do.
Hi, guys. I think some really interesting points were made there. And I'd like to go over some of that debate there because I thought everybody had something to contribute. And I think the major issue here were people talking over each other and not really listening to the other in a way that I think they could have. So I think that Ana Kasparian discussion about class is very strong because she has a point. If we discuss class inequality, for example, making sure that everyone has health care, making sure that everyone has access to higher education. If they don't go to college, they have access to getting a trade or skill and being prepared to go into the workforce. And being able to do so without incurring large amounts of debt, right? Barack Obama had passed a healthcare bill that helped ensure more people get access to healthcare. But we still know millions of people have inadequate healthcare or still have no healthcare at all. So healthcare is still a major problem. We know that people get paid wages that are not they're not able to take care of their family on. Effectively, half the population in the United States is living, and actually it's more than 50%, but we know that effectively more than half the population is living paycheck to paycheck. But we also know that people don't have enough to have a decent standard of living. So class is a real issue. And even more, as Ana Kasparian points out, and then Coleman Hughes points out, is that if you don't, if you were to rectify the class inequality issue, right, and where people had access to these basic needs, the group that would benefit probably the most would be African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos to a large degree, right? So uh, addressing class inequities would be a way of doing something with that would be inclusive, right? And it would be a great way of building coalitions. Although we have the example of Bernie Sanders, who attempted to do this. And interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders, who had a very inclusive uh, position where he included all groups by addressing fundamental class problems, um, was not able to secure the Democrat nomination to be president in the United States. In part, ironically, because he was not effectively able to address the question of racism. And I think it's interesting that Ana Kasparian used the word triggering because in many ways people like Sunny Hostin are triggered by this. But guess what? They're triggered because racism is real in the United States of America. Racism is not a figment of anyone's imagination. It actually exists in the United States, and it's a very real problem. It's not the only problem. The issues of class inequality are a problem too. And it's ironic because, in part, Bernie Sanders lost because he was made to seem that he was insensitive to the question of racism. I personally don't think that Bernie Sanders is any more insensitive to racism than any other of including honestly Barack Obama, to the question of racism. But he was not able to articulate himself in a way that was effective because racism actually doesn't just impact poor blacks; it impacts all classes. So Anna also may have a point in saying that Sonny was triggered because these are very emotional issues. But I will give you an example again why racism is real. In two examples, we could just look at the labor market. We could look at police brutality. Police brutality is something that African Americans of all classes have uh, experienced. If not personally, they can hear stories of their brother, sister, uncle or aunt, their parents, right? Or themselves. And it's feeling like it was a racial attack. Um, Even Roland Fryer, and I'll bring this point up quickly, did a study. Roland Fryer, I say even Roland Fryer, because he did a study of police brutality. And in part of his study, he showed that African Americans and white Americans were killed or violently dealt with in the same degrees, that there was no statistical difference. But in that same study he did, he also showed that African Americans are harassed by the police disproportionately. They are manhandled, they're spoken to in inoffensive ways, right? Um, Spoken down to, and essentially are harassed um, in ways that are not legitimate, right? So even in this study by Roland Fryer, he showed that was happening. Another example is in the labor market with poor African Americans. Well, I shouldn't say poor as much as unskilled African Americans and unskilled whites who were um, applying for jobs. And white Americans who were unskilled um, with a prison record, were able to get uh, these jobs at a higher rate uh, than blacks who had no prison records. These were males going for low-skill jobs, meaning low-skill just meaning no college education, essentially. Um, this was a major study by a Harvard professor. I believe her name is Devar Pager. Unfortunately, she died some years ago. Um, so you have racial discrimination in our society. Unfortunately, it's a real problem. It's even though it's often made out to be like it's a figment of African Americans' imagination. It's documented. There's no way of denying it. Um, and obviously, it's worse if you are a poor or working class, the issue of racism. But that does not negate that black people of all classes uh, face racism in different contexts, and particularly anti-black sentiment, right? Does that mean that uh, this is going to stop blacks from achieving? No, we have many black millionaires, many blacks who are leaders of all kinds of organizations. But I'm of the opinion that uh, people of any race shouldn't have to face such indignities, and that we have to honestly and realistically deal with those problems. And to sort of put it to the side could actually also undermine valuable coalitions that could be built to address questions like universal health care, right? So Bernie Sanders lost in South Carolina because in many ways he couldn't convince the African American community to vote for him. Um, he was made out to be, even though again I don't believe Bernie Sanders is racist in any way, but he was made out to be, uh, you know, racially insensitive and so on. Well, a way to avoid that is to address racism in a real way and not allow your opponents to take advantage like that happen. But also the opposite is true. In order for to build these coalitions, we're going to have to be inclusive, and we're going to have to think about questions like when millions of people of all races and many white people as well don't have access to health care. Many white people as well are not getting the proper wages that they deserve, right? Are not getting access to higher education, or they find themselves in high debt. So where these questions appeal to everyone. So we have to stop talking over each other and address those issues. That racism is real and class inequality is also real. And if you want to alleviate either one of those questions, we're going to have to address both. And that's really the key in how we're going to move ahead. Um, I hope to discuss these issues and maybe give suggestions in future um, presentations. So like me, share this video and press the notification. Thank you. This has been In Class with Dr. T. Take care.